Hello there and welcome to People, Politics and Power. I am Imonia Marere. On this program, we deal with issues and the underlying principles rather than with individuals. We seek to understand the motives and pressures behind policies in governance. Today, we turn the spotlight on a new scorecard that could reshape how Nigerians view public accountability, the 2025 Transparency and Integrity Index. The Bureau of Public Service Reforms recently unveiled the 5th edition of the index. It seeks to shine the light into the often opaque corridors of public service, ranking institutions on their integrity, compliance with due process, and responsiveness to citizens. The 2025 index measured 517 ministries, departments, and agencies of government and their compliance with transparency standards in 5 critical areas. 1. Financial management, control of corruption, open procurement, citizens' engagement, and the 5th one, human resource inclusion. The findings reveal that only 6 out of the 517 MDAs surveyed scored above average. The 6 high performers include the National Oil Spill Detection and Response Agency, the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission, Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission, Development Bank of Nigeria, Tertiary Education Trust Fund, and the Bank of Industry. On the other hand, the poor performance with 10% and below include the Nigeria Police Force and the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation. Now, but beyond the glossy unveiling lies a deeper conversation. How credible is this index? Does it genuinely reflect transparency in governance? Or is it another tick box exercise? Will low-performing agencies be held to account? Or will the numbers fade after the headlines? And most importantly, what does this mean for the ordinary Nigerian who is seeking trust and fairness in public institutions? We will unpack these questions with our panel of experts, policy analysts, and civil society voices, examining whether this new index marks a real step towards accountability or just another government showcase. So we urge you to stay with us as we dig beneath the figures to uncover the truth behind Nigeria's latest transparency scorecard. We'll get to meet our guest analysts right after this timeout. Stay with us.
Of our dream, the Nigeria we need is the united, indissoluble, and cohesive Nigeria, which guarantees equity, fairness, justice, and prosperity for its citizens. That is our focus on People, Politics, and Power. It is fresh, insightful, impactful. It's a must-watch. People, Politics, and Power on AIT.
Thank you for staying with us. Joining me in the studio right now is Faith Nwadishi. She is the Executive Director, Center for Transparency Advocacy. Thank you so much for finding time to join us.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon,
Great.
Nigerians.
And also joining us virtually from Lagos is Mr. Ayo Victor Omowu. Mr. Omowu is of the Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center, CISLAC. He is joining us from Lagos. And then we will also be joined very shortly in the studio by Dr. Umar Yakubu. He is the Executive Director, Center for Fiscal Transparency and Integrity. He will be joining us in a very short while right here in the studio. But let's proceed. Let's continue with our discussion. And let me begin by asking, what exactly is this Transparency and Integrity Index?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon once more, everyone. The Transparency Index is a very interesting tool that was developed, and I'm happy to say that one of the members of the Center for Fiscal Transparency that worked with BPROS on this project is here. It's actually a tool that helps to look at institutions, government institutions, and their methodology, so, transparency and accountability, how accountable they have been in the institution. And this Transparency Index actually complements very nicely the Citizens Delivery Tracker that was also developed by the Central Coordinating Unit led by Dr. Hadiza Bala. There is that app that helps citizens to look at project delivery, while the Transparency Index look at institutions and the way that they interpret their mandate, looking at functionality, looking at response to government. So you would say that they complement each other, and this has been on. I've followed the Transparency Index in the last 5 years. It's very interesting for me that ICPC that scored about 24% last year has come to score about 70-something%. It shows that some of the agencies are looking at those reports and improving on their services. Most importantly for me, because I work also using the freedom of information to deliver on some of the advocacies that we do, shows that like for ICPC, for instance, you will see that they have interpreted directly the provisions in the FOI that talks about proactive disclosure. So proactive disclosure is one, I call it a low-hanging fruit, but I don't know why MDAs don't see that as a low-hanging fruit. Report ahead of time what you have done. Just report it, put it on your website, let people be able to see that. So when people send you FOI and then you don't respond, you can just direct them to where you already have that disclosed. And I'm sure that is one of the things that helped ICPC to come up to the level where they are. As for NOSRA, yeah, I work in the extractive sector, and I'm quite happy to say that they have also improved. We had issues in the past where you want information, you're not able to get that information. But now, NOSRA has become more proactive in the disclosure of their information. I guess that's why they are tops.
It's the highest LARA this time around.
This time around.
78%.
But for me, this most significant improvement is that of ICPC. That scored 24% last year, and then it's scoring about 70-something%. It shows that the index is working. Some MDAs are looking at it, but at the same time, some MDAs are not looking at it, and that's why it's important. We should keep this in the front burner so that citizens can use that to hold MDAs accountable.
Well, we've now been joined by Dr. Umar Yakubu, who is the Executive Director, Center for Fiscal Transparency and Integrity. I'm aware that you worked on this index.
Yes, sir.
So tell us, what was the methodology adopted?
Okay, first of all, just a history. We started it in 2021, so this is the 5th edition actually. So the methodology is across 5 thematic areas. One is fiscal transparency. The second one is open procurement. The third one is human resources and inclusion. The fourth one is citizens engagement. And the fifth one is control of corruption. So across these 5 thematic areas, you have 29 sub-indicators. 7 for the first one, 3 for the second one, 7 for the third one, 5, like that. When we started in 2021, it was 31 indicators, but we merged some now to become 29. So like my colleague here just said, it's basically about proactive disclosure of this type of information that ordinarily, statutorily should be in the public domain. So what we did now, across these 5 thematic areas, we looked at international conventions, United Nations Convention Against Corruption, Open Government Partnership, the World Bank Rules Summit, and the SIFTAS, that's State Fiscal Transparency and Accountability Framework for States. We looked at those international parameters. So you come down, you look at the the FATF, again, Financial Action Task Force. That's from the international dimension. From the local dimension, our constitution, we say, the constitution says is the responsibility of government to combat corruption. So that is one, that is clear. You look at the Fiscal Responsibility Act, and it's more for the federal level, but there are things that are supposed to proactively disclose and some limitations that are not supposed to exceed. That is 2. The third one, you look at the Fiscal Responsibility Act, you look at the ICPC Act, well, you look at the Code of Conduct Bureau Act. So there are several elements. So across these legal and policies, and so we now brought out those 29 sub-indicators. So if you look at the fiscal transparency, let me just take three. Your budget should be in the public domain. How much you expended, nobody needs to invoke the FOI to ask you for how much you expended. Nobody needs to invoke the FOI to ask you how much you implemented. For the procurement sector, there are just three, sorry, variable. Just, okay, how much, in fact, the most important one, procurement implementation report. Because with that report, where you will see every year you will not be buying ACs, you will not be buying cars, you will not be buying all these duplications that they love to do. So that's the second one. Citizens engagement has to do, ghost workers will need to know how many staff every MDA has, how many male, how many female, because we have a principle of federal character now, every state, and we have this principle of inclusion of 30% affirmative action of women in MDAs. We have this principle of people with disability. There's actually a law that says every MDA should have 5% of people with disability. All these things should be in the public domain so that people will go and see and without really using the FOI. Then the last but not the least, the control of corruption. Sorry, I skipped citizens engagement. Is you have all your policies, but your control of corruption implementation report. Because when you have that control and there are indicators there of how you do it, because you have your anti-corruption policy, whistleblower policy, anti-bribery policy, and conflict of interest policy. So how you're implementing those policies will be in your control of corruption implementation report. So once you have these things, you find out the whole ecosystem will be transparent, because we do it at the federal level and at the state and at the local government level. But the local governments now, what we're doing is is deeper, because there are governance issues around there. So we have tweaked it a bit, and we're implementing it separately. But across the federal and state government, this is what we check. The only thing we don't check at the state level, because the federal character principle does not really apply to the state level, because every principle we have will draw a law or a principle to implement it. So at the state level, you find out one sub-indicator is absent, and that is the federal character principle. But every other thing, these 29 are just summarized, applies to the federal and state level.
Now,
So
there are two key words in this index. Yeah. Transparency and integrity. Can we disaggregate them? How do you combine them? I mean, what represents the transparency aspect and the integrity aspect? Okay.
Transparency simply means openness. You can be open in terms of data. To give you an example, the NDDC, Nigeria Delta Development Commission, you see a lot of their data there. They are open. Now, the integrity element is the integrity of what you are posting, because integrity has several elements now. Now, if you are transparent, but what about the integrity of the data you are posting, of the mechanism of all these indicators? That is why the two go together. If you don't have the integrity, you find out that you cannot publish, you can't even be transparent. So that is why, because if we just said the transparency index, you just publish everything and we're home and dry. But because people are checking, civil society are checking, media are checking, the integrity component, you find out people now, MDA, are struggling to comply with some of these provisions.
So how credible is this index? How significant is it at this time in the governance process in Nigeria? This is the 5th edition.
Yes, this is the 5th edition, and I have at every time that index is published, I've always looked at that index, looked at it side by side with the Transparency International Index that we usually have, and see that there's no much disparity. What you have with the Transparency and Integrity Index is more homegrown. The context is more about the Nigerian MDAs and you see the reality. of it that is going on there. The only thing is that a lot of Nigerians are yet to be aware that you have this kind of index that can help you assess the way that agencies work. You know, what we do really is about service delivery. Some of the core areas that we work is about service delivery. I'm talking about BPRS, that is also partnering with the Center for Transparency, Fiscal Transparency and Integrity on this project. For a very long time, when Dr. Joaba was there, they developed an FOI app on their website, which you can actually use. We were going to pay an advocacy visit there, and I saw that app, and I said, okay, let me try to see if it works. And I did a message. While we were at that meeting, he pointed out, oh, somebody just sent a message, and I was quick to tell him that I sent that message right in front of your office, just to find out if that app is working. And that app is still there. So some of these things are the things that have helped to do that. For instance, take the area of freedom of information. A lot of the agencies are still struggling with implementation of freedom of information. And I hope that perhaps the next year integrity index that will be done, the issue of freedom of information will now be cascaded to the states, because there's a Supreme Court judgment that has now made it compulsory for every tier of government to implement the Freedom of Information Act 2011 up to local government level. So that excuse of states saying, no, they have to domesticate their own laws, they have to do this. Before now, we had only 3 states. And that's why I'm not also surprised from the integrity index that we had. There's not a single state that scored 50%, apart from Kaduna State that scored about 40-something%. Not a single state was able to come up to 50%. So that's to show you that there's a lot of work, much more work that we need to do. Some of the questions we are demanding from the federal level, if we put that same pressure, looking at the results we have gotten from this index, that's talking about how important it is. Now, using all of those information to hold these MDAs accountable at state level, at local government level, I tell you, we'll begin to now benefit, like they say, dividends of democracy. It's about helping citizens to navigate the kind of issues that are coming up from this. Because even from that index, you see what the challenges are. But he was trying to talk about the issue of transparency and integrity. For me, integrity is about the process that brought about that your transparency. If you say this record, we have X, Y, Z, this is the record, anybody can access it. But what were the internal processes that led you to bring out that information to the public? It's just like, oh, you are saying, oh, I want X and Y information. But there's a law that says this is how that information should be given. And then people go back to say Official Secrecy Act. Meanwhile, there's already a law that has set aside the Official Secrecy Act, but you're still depending on official. It means that the process that brought about that transparency, you cannot vouch for the integrity of that process. So it's very important that this goes side by side. People talk about transparency and accountability, but I like that angle of the integrity of it, because it shows that you have gone back to the processes, your process, your systems. I know, and this also brings to the fore when people talk about strong systems. It is the integrity that helps you to determine how strong a system is. And strong systems can only come about when you are implementing your laws, your mandates that you have, so that you don't have strong people who undermine the process of a strong system. So when you have citizens understand that this information is there, especially the issue of procurement, even though the issue of procurement, we have had these problems in 2007 when the procurement law, the first provision of the procurement law itself, there's no government that has been able to implement that. Set up a procurement council with civil society there. There's no procurement council, but procurement is going on. But that's the first law, the first provision in the Procurement Act of 2007. So people don't look at that first provision, and then we are going to look at, oh, what's the process, fiscal transparency, Fiscal Responsibility Act. What are you doing? How are you including people? What is the information that you're giving out there? So indexes like this that we have in the country is very, very important. I was just mentioning the citizens' delivery tracker. Now, when you have this kind of information, what you're supposed to do is also look at it from the citizens' delivery tracker, Citizens Delivery Tracker will tell you this organization is supposed to deliver on 5-6 projects within so period of time. As a citizen, are you aware that this MDA has delivered on that? If you are not aware, or there's no such thing going on, you can actually go back. And if you look at it side by side with the Transparency and Integrity Index that you have, you want to see what have they reported concerning it. Was it even part of their report that they sent out? So it's important. And I'm not saying, I don't want to say that there's a Transparency International Index does not work for us. But if you put side by side Transparency International Index and put side by side this Transparency Index and Integrity, I would rather work with the information that I get from the Transparency and Integrity Index, because it helps me to relate directly with what is happening. Moreover, most of these indexes are done on issues of perception and all of that, because that's what the Transparency Perception Index is about, perception about. But this gives you a near reality of what is happening within those MDAs. And you as a citizen, media, civil society, you take this information and begin to hold them accountable for it. And I'm sure by the time we do that, play our role, I'm sure we will now begin to get, imagine, it's not a very happy news to hear that over 500 MDAs, and you just have about less than 10 MDAs scoring above
average.
50.
I mean, only 6 out of 500.
So there's a lot of work to be done
Yes.
with this kind of information that we have on our tables.
So that brings me, Doctor, to the issue of credibility again of this index. If out of 517 MDAs that were surveyed, only 6 scored above average. And like she has also mentioned now, the fact that no state government scored up to 50%. One begins to wonder how well they have received the previous 4 indexes that were published, that were done and published. How seriously have they taken those indexes for them to now grapple with the outcome of this 5th index?
Okay, for the states, it's a little bit complex in the sense that when we first started, the states were actually doing well. There were some that were scoring 60, 70, well, late 60s. But there was a reason, there was a caveat to that. They had applied for a World Bank loan called SIFTAS. And one of the preconditions of giving that loan was publication of certain categories of information, which about 8 or 9 of those pillars out of the 31 were part of our own broader index. So the states were doing high. We were doing well. But now SIFTAS exited in 2022, if I'm correct. And our data, when we first started 2021, we took 5 years data. 2022, 6 years data. 2023, 7 years data. So we're building. But last year, due to some certain concerns, we brought it down to 5. Okay, we'll just be taking 5 years. Because sometimes some complain, okay, when the previous government have left, they can't get the information, so it's affecting their scores, and it's not looking productive. So we say, okay, now let's limit it to 5 years. So like the data you have seen now is data from 2021 to 2024, and that has cut across different governments. So, but you now see some that did slightly well was because of the little work those previous governments did, like Kaduna and Kano, and I think Kwara also did well. But post-SIFTAS now, they stopped publishing because the World Bank has exited the program now. Nobody is monitoring them. Nobody is selling them. You must publish these things. So these are the issues.
So they did not imbibe the lessons learned from SIFTAS.
No continuity.
To even engage with their own internal systems.
Exactly. And that is why I think Budget IT tried to cover one of those gaps, because they have a state of states transparency program, something around the states, but related just to budget, just to fill that gap. And if you see, they released the report about 2 or 3 weeks ago. It was all flat. They were not doing well because, SIFTAS has exited. So that was just the problem. For the federal government, it's similar, but I will admit that there is more interest. Why, like my colleague said, they are struggling to publish some information. Civil society is asking for your budget implementation report. Or sorry, let's even take the procurement implementation report. You and I know 90%, all the data has shown 90% of the public sector corruption we talk about is through procurement. So we are telling them to publish their crimes. which is now where the integrity comes in, and which is why it becomes difficult. Because if you say an implementation report, it means you can't duplicate, be putting AC every year, be putting gas everywhere, because we will see it, the media will see it. You will definitely see who is collecting all the contracts. You will definitely see this other law, or the beneficial ownership element will come in. All these things will be revealed. That is why if you, apart from the sectoral, the general ranking, we have sectoral ranking. They are all doing very badly under procurement, and that is where now if we need to target areas, we target procurement, because you can easily publish your budget, but have you implemented it? You see it is weak. You understand? Publish your capital versus your recurrent. Easy implementation, you find that the capital implementation report is weak. So that's why we have put these sub-indicators to be monitoring them individually. At the state level, publish number of staff you have, you will never get it. You will just not see it, because there are elements of ghost workers, and there are accusations that that's how they put names. That's why they always do this verification, moving millions here and there. So these are just some of the insights to this report.
Now, how do you then respond to those who, for instance, criticize this index and say, oh, it's just a tick box exercise? You just tick off one of this, tick off one of that, and that is actually not genuinely reflecting the transparency in government.
Yeah, we avoided, when we're developing the methodology in 2021 during COVID, we were lucky to avoid the burden that the Transparency International has, because as they have element of survey in their own methodology, that's why the element of perception comes in. And now when perception comes in, it's subjective data. Now these 29 indicators are all objective data. That is one. Secondly, all the 29 indicators are bound by Nigerian law or principle. All of them. Your budget should be in the public domain, Section 2 of the FOI Act. All those elements, proactive disclosure. That's why that FOI Act, if you look at just Section 2, is enough to fix a lot of these things. Proactive disclosure of these elements. We have laws that say you must have 5% people with disability. You have principles, even if it's not a law, that say you must have a certain percentage of women in government. You have laws that say you must combat corruption. It's in our constitution already, and it's in different in our acts, both at federal and state level. We have laws for all these, and so every sub-indicator is tied to a law. And if you look at the methodology, you see this sub-indicator, this is the law that says if there's an international principle, we'll add it. So if you don't like it, you now go and repeal the law to say, okay, now the law says you are not supposed to combat corruption. Then we'll now remove that indicator. So that is why, honestly, we have not gotten any serious, negative feedback on the index. The most one is that we got last at that, but there's no serious improvement. But my colleagues said earlier on, there's improvement in some areas, but in some areas, like I told the procurement, the improvement is actually minimal.
Now, my concern, and the concern of so many people here, is that this is the 5th edition. In other words, the previous 4 editions were available to all the MDAs and even to the presidency. Now, how serious are they taking this data and the ranking? Who validates the data and the ranking in the first place? And how serious do they take it? Who is putting pressure on the MDAs that are not performing well? I'm sure there are some that are consistently been on the low side. How do you get them to upscale their performance?
I think getting them to upscale their performance depends on how citizens receive this and use information. Because that's the only the place where the pressure will come in from. Now, we're looking at only 517 MDAs. But you know that even at the federal level, we have over 1,000 MDAs. So there are some MDAs that have not even been covered.
Not even been ranked at all.
I'm sure that even as we sit here, there are some MDAs we don't even know exist. It is only maybe when you hear at the National Assembly they are trying to do their oversight or something, and we are wondering, oh, so this kind of MDA exists. So for this 517 that we have, most times when you do this kind of data collection and bring out an index and begin to rank people, the people within those MDAs themselves, they just see it as something that they need to do, tick off the box. But by the time you let citizens have this information, the media begins to interrogate them. For instance, you go to ICPC to say, what was it that you did differently between last year and this year that made you jump from to have over 50%? You were 24% in 2024, and now you are 70-something% in 2025. What was it that happened? How did you do that? So that when citizens also put that, and then also go to that citizen delivery tracker that I said, that I talked about, that it is an app, it's actually online that you can go and see what targets they have set for the different MDAs. If these things are not working, put pressure on the citizens. And you know, that helps, that goes a long way. Like they say, when you put something in a book, a lot of people don't see it, but it's changing. If you ask me, it's changing gradually. If you look at the pressure, I'm taking, for instance, the constitutional review that is going on, the reserved seats for women. People would assume that that is the only area of constitutional review, but they have so many other areas that they're looking at in the constitutional review. But you see the way the women have taken it. Even up to communities now, there's pressure. People are putting pressure on political leaders and all of that. That's the kind of pressure we need to see in the implementation of this. And unless we get that kind of pressure, people will continue to think about. Now, what that's the citizens tracker also does is that information like this will help to put pressure on the ministers and the permanent secretaries. Because if you are not performing, you have some performance indicators that you're supposed to reach. Now, you have these laws that we have said that this index is based on. Why are you not implementing them? So it's important that civil society, citizens themselves, and most importantly, media, should look at this and begin to take them sector by sector, MDAs that we are working. Because if we're looking at just 517, we still have over 500 other MDAs that we have not been able to touch by this. But we need to be able to have those models, you know, that can set that example. Perhaps, for instance, you take this index, and I'm happy that BPRS is also part of this, because what they do is Bureau for Public Service Reform. So they should take this and hold the CEOs or the heads, like, for instance, the permanent secretaries, the directors of those MDAs accountable for non-performance. So there are some MDAs that for the 5 years, they have not performed. They have not performed. They have not moved. They have not changed from where they were from the very first index to where they are now. And some of those MDAs still have in position the CEOs or the heads of those MDAs working there. It means that this index, is it that nobody is holding them accountable, the issue of impunity, which also directly addresses the issue of corruption, how they are addressing corruption, how are they taking this? For instance, if you ask MDAs, this transparency index and integrity index that we have, do you have a report? Because at the end of it, as soon as this report comes, and I know that this report is usually published, disseminated at the Federal Ministry of Finance. I think I've been at 2 of these other events where it's disseminated. What is a report of your officer on the implementation and why you didn't do well in that? And what are your plans in place to be able to do that? Perhaps if citizens begin to ask those questions, some of them will begin to sit up, and they will not see the importance of this implementation. But unfortunately, as Nigerians, we like to listen to the international ratings, rather than those ratings that will help us make progress for us by Nigerians and for Nigerians. This is one of those kind of ratings that we should look at very seriously. There are some agencies, because of the work that they do, contribute to whatever perception index that we have and the rate that Nigeria is on. But now you're not looking at Nigeria as one picture, but you're looking at the different agencies and what they are contributing to that collective of Nigeria. That's why this is very important.
Are there plans, say, in the next index to bring in more MDAs into the dragnet and collect data from there and rank them? Are there such plans? If there are over 1,000 MDAs existing, and we have only succeeded in rating and ranking only 517 this time around, what happens to the others?
Okay, thank you. Just to add to something she said, I think is important. The philosophy behind this local index is to help them improve. Nobody is trying to bring any MDA down. That is why we release the index on 28th of September every year, which ties with the United Nations International Day for Universal Access to Information. 6 months before the release of the day, we have an engagement with all MDAs at the Federal Ministry of Finance to present the methodology and tell them you have 6 months to put up this data on your website. So we even inform them beforehand and tell them on 28th of September, we are coming to present the report. And sometimes we still get this kind of dismal performances. So what is actually not okay is we have 500, when we first started it was 511. The following year it was 513, now we have 517. But you now be watching AIT, you now see Senate is engaging with this ministry, new MDA, you wonder where it's spotted from. There is no website, no information anywhere. You go to this website of the SGF, their information is not there. So sometimes that's how we're adding 111. But if you go, no information anywhere. And you now hear monies have been released to such MDAs or commissions or agencies, and you just don't understand what is going on. And there are so many of them that nobody can really tell you the number, because if you go to the SGF's website, where I believe it ought to be there, that website is not up as at the last time we checked. If you go to the website of the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation, where at least you might see payments going on, that website too is down. You will not get all this kind of information. Federal Ministry of Information, you have a lot of information, but not about MDs. Actually, that's not even their responsibility. SGF website, it is not there. Accountant General's website is not there. So these are the problems we have. So only when you are watching news, you now just see the Senate or the House of Reps is engaging this MDA that you have never heard of in your life. And this has been happening because there seems to be one new obsession about creating agencies, especially in the last 2, 3, 4 years, you understand? So these are the challenges we have.
And now that you have talked about it, is it worrisome for you and indeed for any other person that the Office of the Accountant General is one of those that performed very poorly in this regard, when in actual fact it should be the one giving all the information that you require?
Agreed. If you say poorly, if I'm correct, their score was 0. Because 0 in terms that you are not publishing anything proactively. Now, like I said, if you look at the philosophy behind and look at it as a Nigerian, you want investors to come, you want people to come, and the first place they go to is your website. That's why all this junketing around they don't bring in anything to the country. The people, see, as they say in finance, capital chases investment. You don't go and be having summits and all those chasing around, no money will come. Now, when people want to invest money, they will simply go to your website first. And it's what they get there that will now inspire them to take the next step, whether to come and see where they're going to invest. So that is why MDAs need to understand this is for the benefit of the country and benefit of the system. Because we're all Nigerians and want to promote Nigeria. And like she said, in case you are not happy with the international ranking, sometimes they are rushing to go and comply with because they want to look good. This is homegrown, this is home-based, and this is meant to help develop the country at both tiers of government.
Talking about being a homegrown index, how consistent is this index with the citizens' actual experiences of transparency and service delivery?
Okay, this gives me a more realistic picture of what is happening. If this index had come up to say, out of 517 MDAs, 500 is called 70, then I will question it because I engage MDAs. I'm working with MDAs, I'm sending freedom of information to MDAs. In fact, I was shocked that Third Fund was part of those that did well, because I have issues with Third Fund on the issue of proactive disclosure and response to FOI. It's not that they will not respond, they will respond to you, write to you, but getting the information you need is another thing. So for me, looking at this index and the reality, it gives you a picture of what is happening. Imagine scoring 6 over 517, and at state level, the state level index for me is even most interesting, because a lot of us, civil society citizens, were looking at government programs at national level. I have also argued, for instance, that when we're looking at electoral reforms and at issues of democracy, where we should demand and pay more attention to is at local government and state level. and state level. Rather, I'm not saying don't pay attention to what is happening at federal level, but look at what is happening at state level and local government level, because these are where you have government that is closer to the people and where you need to have delivery of democracy and governance. But we are leaving that. Rather, we begin to look at what is the bigger, the macro picture, instead of looking at the micro picture. That's why this is very, very important. I don't know what strategy that you have to be able to, disseminate this information to Nigerians in a way that is easily understandable. Because I went through the index, and I'm looking at all of those information, If not that I have some background in, looking at all of this analysis, I'm looking at how will community people, for instance, understand this index. So if you have it put in an infographic kind of manner, and look at those areas that appeal more to the people. For instance, Nostra. Everybody is celebrating Nostra. But if you go to the Niger Delta, the reality of the people there and the experience with Nostra, does it, relate? So you need to have the people have this information so that they can also be part of that. I know that recently Nostra really have been very proactive in their... I've had to engage them, and they have also done some few things around the issues around venting, and getting the information around all of those issues around the spills, and that's what they are doing. But we need to have more experience to do that. And the only way we can do that and get citizens to put that pressure, so let citizens understand and also have this information about that. If at the end of the day we do this, citizens also have their own scorecard to say, this agency, yes, you have done this, this integrity, it's in line with your information, because there's a part of inclusion. There's a part of inclusion. How inclusive have this MDA been? How interactive
citizens
have they
engagement
been?
And all of that.
Engagement.
Yes.
Some, for instance, some NDAs, they have quarterly fora where they meet with citizens. But some NDAs don't even want to have any conversation around that at all with anybody. So you want to look at how far they have gone with all of those. And for me, the most important thing, I don't know, maybe because I have read the Freedom of Information Law, and I've seen that the Freedom of Information Law is one law that is so underrated in Nigeria, but it's one law that can help us unlock these issues of transparency and accountability. If agencies and local government and state governments implement it and citizens understand what is it that we are asking for. The Freedom of Information Law sets aside the Official Secrecy Act. And most times, these things that questions we are asking for is questions that we can get from the Freedom of Information. And Freedom of Information, you don't have the report, you don't have the access to information you need. Gives you the power to go to court after 7 days. Just 7 days. And the beauty about the Supreme Court judgment is that it has helped to set aside all those laws that were put by state governments. Some state governments will say 30 days. Some state governments will say it is the governor that must approve before that information can be given out. But the Freedom of Information says 7 days, and you cannot ask for another extra 7 days to say, I need this information, and they don't give you. Within 30 days, you will go to court to get... We have done it. We took the Federal Ministry of Health to court over the issues around freedom of information. People have gone to court around that. So consistency and information helps citizens to relate, to say, this information that has come out, is it part of what is happening? So 6/571 for me is not a surprise, because the issue of impunity, the issue of corruption, the issue of procurement processes and all of that, all the agencies are supposed to have a procurement team and also have civil society as observers. When was the last time they even invited civil society to observe their procurement process? But to see procurement happening every day. But for me, the fundamental thing about this procurement is that we have a law in this country about procurement, and we have refused to implement the first provision. The first provision. So, in fact, nobody should be scoring anything when it comes to the issue of procurement, because the first provision in that law says, set up a procurement council, let there be civil society in that procurement council, and there's no precedent since 2007 that has been able to implement that. So it's not just about this government that is in office. There's no precedent that has implemented that part of setting up a procurement council with civil society in it.
So in your view, can this tool, this index, realistically drive behavioral change in the bureaucracy? Do you think it will? I mean, as we move along, especially for those agencies, departments, and ministries that have consistently been scoring low, should there be sanctions of any sort? And what kind of sanctions would you recommend? Can it drive behavioral change? Is it driving behavioral change?
Yeah, and the steps to a destination begins with baby steps. So we look at it from the positive angle. Let me use a few examples. For years, a behemoth, let me use that one, like NNPC was always scoring 0. Now they have 30-something. Is it good enough? No, but it's baby steps. You understand? Other agencies now, they were scoring less than 10 and all around, hovering around 30, 40. So those are the issues we try to look at, that which is some elements of change are happening. But as we are doing that, also we'll be looking at the high-risk sectors, because that is also strategic. Okay, you now look at the 29 indicators, then now decide which one you report so that you increase your score. Procurement, you not see them being serious about procurement because that is a high-risk area. And the issues around employment, they will not want to do. One good thing about that FOI Act, that Section 2, it actually mandates proactive disclosure of information to the extent of salaries of public officers. Salaries, proactive. You don't even need to invoke the, to even demand for it, but they are all not comply. So if we continue this work and see that there's some level of improvement, I think with time we'll get there. It will behavioral change. Until, again, what she said, once we get citizens to engage. Now imagine you release a report that says MDAs should have 30% of women. What you naturally expect for the women to rise up, we want our 30%. 5% for people with disability. You naturally expect people with disability to rise up, and so that they should set up mechanism to get their 5%. So there are other little elements not really related to money and finance and corruption that really needs to help, especially in the citizens' engagement. You say you have federal character, for whatever reason, it's a law, we must implement it. Publish the number of citizens of each indigene on your public website. You don't have to put the name. It's very easy, but they will not do it. So we need to just keep on pushing. I like using this proverb in Igbo land that they say, when you wake up in the morning, you greet everybody, including those that are deaf. So we'll continue to talk to them. Okay, publish. I'll be continue counting our positives, the 1, 2, or 3, as we go on.
So in your view, on the final note, what do you think should be done with this 2025 index so that it's not left to gather dust on the shelves? How can citizens, how can the media engage with it? What do they do with it, and how do we make it a living document?
I think one of the responsibilities for BPRS to take the report itself and use that to plan for the reforms that will be happening around governance within those MDAs. Very important. Because if this is coming out and BPRS is taking responsibility for it, they should be able to do that. Secondly, this report should be simplified enough to make it, accessible on social media, let people understand the implications of what it's been 5 years now. The buzz around it is not as much as we want people to hear about it. So people should do that. And that's where also the media would come in. Analysis, and I really am grateful to you for doing this. Analysis around this, what are the implications? Let us not play politics with this. Because at the end of the day, these MDAs are spending our money. It is our people that are there. It is not foreigners that are in these MDAs. We are speaking to ourselves like family members. Let people look at this, not from the point of view because I belong to a different political party, you belong to a different political... I'm not a politician, by the way. You understand? So let us look at that and bring out those solutions that will help us move the country forward and let this happen. If we have the freedom of information, MDAs are signing to open government partnership. We're looking at the citizen tracker and the development that is happening. We're looking at all of the renewed hope agenda of this government and all that they have done. What we need to do is take this report and let it be part of the reforms going forward, so that quarterly you can actually set up an M&E tracking tool to see how far they have implemented it. And it is BPPIRS that should be at the center of that tracking to hold all of these government agencies accountable. And then perhaps the members of the National Assembly should take this as part of their oversight. When they are engaging those ministries and agencies, they should find out why they have not performed in certain areas. Forever, we have called for the review of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. This is one reason why the Fiscal Responsibility Act should be reformed. They're also looking at the reform of the Freedom of Information Law. All of these things should be part of what we are looking at, and then carry it on so that the next year we will see a better result. But then, I'll just say finally, we can also use this as a performance assessment of the heads of those agencies. Because if under your call you are scoring 0, when you are implementing laws of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, it means that you have not done anything about it. Every quarter, every year, this kind of index should be used to also assess the performance of the heads of those agencies, not just the foot soldiers of those agencies, but assess the performance so that when an agency is doing well, you can tie it to the proactiveness of the head of that agency going forward for us to have a better delivery of our agencies and their mandates.
So it should be a scorecard for, say, the ministers of those ministries, the permanent secretaries and leaders of those ministries. This should be a scorecard for them, and the president and secretary to government especially should be looking at this very critically.
Yes.
And at the state level, and it's actually a corruption risk assessment too. The higher your number, the higher your score, the less corruption you have in that agency. So when you're scoring 0 or 5 or 10, it means all you're doing there is corruption, especially when we look at other indicators under procurement and budget. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Dr. Umar Yakubu is the Executive Director, Center for Fiscal Transparency and Integrity, and he's been joined by Faith Nwandishi, who is the Executive Director, Center for Transparency Advocacy. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for
and that's our
having me.
program today. Please join us again when we bring you a fresh edition of People, Politics, and Power. Bye for now.